First-class arrival. Arthur Abernathy edged along the aisle, the nubby texture of his aged tweed coat a jarring note against the buttery-soft, ivory leather upholstery that defined first class. Each step was a small victory, his knuckles white as he gripped the seat backs for balance. He seemed utterly misplaced, an old oak uprooted and replanted in a manicured garden. The air hummed with the sleek aromas of expensive aftershave and freshly ground beans, a universe away from the faint camphor scent that clung to his clothes. Chad Sterling, bronzed and sculpted, lounged back, a sneer barely contained. Tiffany Hayes, a flurry of designer labels and meticulously arranged blonde waves, choked back a laugh. Seriously? Chad drawled, disdain lacing his tone. They let anyone up here these days. Tiffany fluttered her heavily mascaraed lashes, her gaze sweeping over Mr. Abernathy with undisguised amusement. He probably cashed in every last frequent flyer mile. How sweet! She reached for her gargantuan sunglasses, dismissing him with a flick of the wrist. Oblivious, or perhaps simply immune, Arthur continued his measured trek. Reaching seat 2A, he lowered himself into it with a soft groan. The plush leather seemed to engulf him, his slight frame swallowed by the generous proportions. He wrestled with the seatbelt, his gnarled fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar clasp. A click, then a tug, a frown creasing his forehead when it didn't seem quite right. Another attempt, brow furrowed in concentration. Across the aisle, Chad and Tiffany exchanged knowing glances. Chad rolled his eyes, a near imperceptible shake of his head. "He'll need a stewardess to buckle him in," he murmured, barely suppressing a snicker. Tiffany giggled. "Maybe they'll give him a booster seat." Finally triumphant, Arthur straightened, his gaze traveling to the overhead bin. He reached, his arm trembling faintly, to lift a well-worn leather briefcase, its surface scarred with age. It proved heavier than it looked, crammed with papers and dog-eared books. "Allow me, sir," a flight attendant offered, her smile polished and professional. She smoothly stowed the briefcase. "Thank you, my dear," Arthur responded, his voice a surprising baritone despite his frail frame. As she moved away, Arthur settled back, his eyes fixed on the window. He watched the ground crew swarm around the aircraft, a faint, enigmatic smile touching his lips. He was an oddity in this realm of luxury, a vestige of a different age. Yet beneath the fragile exterior resided a keen intellect and a reservoir of experiences, secrets, and abilities that these coddled passengers couldn't even comprehend. Adjusting his spectacles, he regarded the wing. Its subtle, elegant curve, carefully designed, precisely manufactured. Did the young engineer who designed it fully grasp the loads it would bear, the forces it would defy? He doubted it. Wisdom came from weathering the storms, not just reading about them. He glanced back at Chad and Tiffany, now absorbed by their phones, lost in the curated realities of their digital lives. Let them judge. Let them whisper. He had faced far more formidable adversaries than their petty scorn. He had survived tempests they couldn't imagine. And he sensed, with a deep, unshakable conviction, that this flight, this seemingly mundane journey, was poised to become anything but. Safety briefing snub. Tiffany Hayes, all immaculate blonde highlights and precisely contoured cheekbones, launched into the safety demonstration with the weary enthusiasm of a hostage reading a ransom note. Her practiced gestures, pointing to exits with lacquered nails, demonstrating the brace position with a tight smile, were a masterclass in detached professionalism. Arthur Abernathy watched her with genuine interest, his brow furrowed in concentration. The other first-class passengers, a collection of sun-kissed executives and designer-clad socialites, mostly ignored her, absorbed in their tablets or sipping pre-flight champagne. Chad Sterling, bronzed and sculpted like a Greek god carved from a block of arrogance, openly yawned. When Tiffany finished, her voice trailing off with a perfunctory, "Are there any questions?" Mr. Abernathy raised a hand, his movement slow but deliberate. "Yes, young lady," he said, his voice surprisingly strong for a man his age. "About the emergency exits. You pointed to 2 at the front and 2 at the rear. But what about the overwing exits? Are they automatically activated, or do passengers need to manually open them?" Tiffany blinked, a flicker of annoyance crossing her perfectly made-up face. Sir, all emergency exits are clearly marked and equipped with easy-to-follow instructions. In the unlikely event of an emergency, I understand that, Mr. Abernathy interrupted gently. But in a chaotic situation, clarity often goes out the window, doesn't it? Knowing whether to pull a lever or wait for an automatic release could save precious seconds. Chad Sterling snorted, loud enough for several heads to turn. Seriously? Are we expecting Grandpa here to single-handedly evacuate the plane? He chuckled, a low, condescending sound. Tiffany suppressed a smile, but her eyes gleamed with amusement. Mr. Abernathy's face didn't change. He simply turned towards Chad, his gaze steady and unwavering. Experience, he said quietly, has taught me that preparedness is never a waste of time. And sometimes, young man, the most valuable asset in a crisis isn't muscle, but knowledge. Chad rolled his eyes, muttering something under his breath about drama queens. Tiffany, sensing the tension, quickly intervened. Sir, she said to Mr. Abernathy, her voice regaining its polished veneer, the overwing exits have both manual and automatic release mechanisms. In most situations, they'll deploy automatically. However, in the unlikely event of a malfunction, there are clearly marked levers for manual operation. We also have trained crew members stationed at each exit to assist. Mr. Abernathy nodded slowly. Thank you, young lady. That clarifies things considerably. He settled back in his seat, seemingly unperturbed by Chad's rudeness. But as he looked out the window, a faint tightening around his eyes suggested he wasn't as unaffected as he appeared. The engines began to whine, building to a crescendo as the plane prepared for takeoff. The subtle vibrations hummed through the cabin, a promise of escape, or perhaps, something else entirely. Turbulence terror. The Boeing 737 climbed smoothly, engines humming a lullaby of assured flight. Ethan, gazing out the window, felt a surge of excitement as the patchwork fields of Nebraska shrank below. He imagined himself already in California, basking in the sun, embarking on his adventure. Smooth sailing, eh? Arthur Abernathy remarked from the aisle seat. He was fiddling with a complex-looking multitool, its polished steel glinting in the morning sun. Chad Sterling, sprawled in the window seat, scoffed without looking up from his phone. Please. This is hardly a puddle jumper. Relax, Grandpa. Tiffany Hayes, the flight attendant, paused beside them, a forced smile plastered on her face. Everything all right here, gentlemen? Peachy, Chad said, waving her away dismissively. Just try not to spill anything on my suit when you bring the champagne. Tiffany's smile tightened imperceptibly before she moved on, her eyes flickering with barely concealed annoyance. Ethan thought she handled the situation with grace, even though Chad was clearly a jerk. Suddenly, the plane lurched. Not a gentle dip, but a violent shove that sent a collective gasp through the cabin. Ethan's stomach leaped into his throat. Arthur's multi-tool clattered to the floor. Chad's phone went flying. What the hell was that? Chad barked, finally looking up, his face a mask of annoyance. Before anyone could answer, the plane was thrown sideways. Luggage tumbled from overhead compartments, a laptop bag, a dented guitar case, a brightly colored beach umbrella. Screams erupted from the passengers. The oxygen masks dropped with a disconcerting hiss. Tiffany, her face now pale and strained, grabbed the nearest seat back, shouting, "Fasten your seatbelts. Brace yourselves." The turbulence intensified. The plane felt like a toy in the hands of a giant child, tossed and shaken without mercy. Ethan gripped the armrests, knuckles white. He glanced at Arthur, expecting to see panic, but the old man's expression was remarkably calm, almost calculating. He was intently observing something near the back of the plane. Chad, however, was a picture of unadulterated fear, his arrogance completely evaporated. He fumbled with his seatbelt, his face slick with sweat. "I'm going to sue. I'm going to sue all of you." Another violent jolt ripped through the aircraft. A section of the overhead panel near the rear of the plane popped open, revealing a tangle of wires and something else. something that made Arthur Abernathy's eyes widen almost imperceptibly. He leaned forward, peering intently. Ethan, following Arthur's gaze, saw it too. Nestled amongst the wires, glinting ominously in the dim light, was a small, metallic device with a blinking red light. It didn't look like any part of the plane. Terror, cold and sharp, pierced through Ethan's initial fear. This wasn't just turbulence. This was something far more dangerous. He looked at Arthur again, seeking confirmation. The old man met his gaze, his expression grim. He slowly shook his head, then pointed discreetly towards Tiffany, who was struggling to maintain her composure while assisting a frantic passenger. The blinking red light pulsed, a silent, malevolent countdown. Sparking danger. The overhead panel above the emergency exit popped open with a violent shudder, showering Chad with dust and a few stray oxygen masks still stubbornly clinging to their compartments. He yelped, batting them away like oversized, suffocating moths. What the hell was that? He sputtered, scrambling back in his seat. Tiffany, who had been meticulously checking seatbelts further down the aisle, rushed towards him, her face a mask of professional concern. "Are you all right, sir? Did anything hit you?" Chad, usually eager to play the injured party, just pointed a trembling finger at the gaping hole in the ceiling. "Look!" A tangle of wires, ripped from their moorings, dangled precariously. One, stripped bare of its insulation, arced with a bright, angry spark, followed by the acrid smell of burning plastic. "Oh, God," Tiffany breathed, her composure cracking like thin ice. This wasn't turbulence, or a spilled drink. This was real. The sparking intensified, a frantic strobe against the drab cabin interior. A thin tendril of smoke, grey and ominous, began to snake its way out of the panel. "Do something!" Chad shrieked, his earlier arrogance replaced with pure, unadulterated terror. He clawed at the armrests, his knuckles white. "Put it out! We're going to crash!" Tiffany's training kicked in, even as her mind screamed in protest. "Stay calm, so. Everything is going to be all right." She knew it was a lie the moment the words left her mouth. Where was the fire extinguisher? She'd seen it during the pre-flight check, somewhere near the galley, she thought, but the thought seemed distant, unreal. She glanced around, desperately searching for a solution, a sign, anything. Passengers were beginning to stir, whispering amongst themselves, their faces etched with growing anxiety. The constant hum of the engines, usually a comforting drone, now seemed like a sinister countdown. Another, louder spark erupted from the damaged wire, followed by a small, but distinct, pop. The smell of burning plastic intensified, now laced with the sharper, more metallic tang of ozone. Tiffany's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew, with chilling certainty, that this was beyond her pay grade, beyond her training, beyond anything she had ever prepared for. Chad was beside himself. He grabbed Tiffany's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "We're all going to die. Do something, you stupid." He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes wide with a sudden, fresh wave of fear. Tiffany didn't even register the insult. She was frozen, paralyzed by the sheer enormity of the situation. The sparking wire, the growing smoke, the rising panic in the cabin, it was all too much. She looked at Chad, his face contorted with terror, and saw her own fear reflected back at her. They were both trapped, helpless, waiting for the inevitable. An unlikely hero. The acrid smell of burning plastic intensified, clawing at the back of Arthur Abernathy's throat. Chad Sterling, formerly puffed up with self-importance, now resembled a deflated balloon. His face, usually flushed with bravado, was ashen, eyes wide with a terror that bordered on the comical, were it not for the genuine danger. Tiffany Hayes, her professional composure visibly cracking, barked orders into her radio, her voice tight and strained. "We need fire suppression immediately. Section A, Row 3. Repeat, fire." Her words dissolved into static. Mr. Abernathy, however, remained remarkably calm. While others panicked, he observed. Sparks, tiny but persistent, were spitting from the mangled charging cable plugged into the overhead compartment. The plastic casing of the compartment was already beginning to melt, dripping viscous black goo onto the plush carpet below. Smoke, thick and grey, snaked upwards, triggering the high-pitched shriek of the smoke alarm. "Everyone remain calm," Tiffany yelled, the plea sounding more desperate than authoritative. Her eyes darted around the cabin, searching for a solution, a hero, anything. Mr. Abernathy rose slowly, deliberately, his movements a stark contrast to the frenzied energy around him. Ignoring the stares, the whispers, the palpable fear, he reached up and unlatched the small storage compartment above his seat. He wasn't reaching for his bag, but for the thin, airline-issued blanket. It was scratchy and smelled faintly of industrial cleaner, but it would have to do. Chad, still frozen in his seat, stammered, "What? What are you doing, old man?" Mr. Abernathy offered him a brief, pitying glance. "Preventing a rather unpleasant outcome, young man." He unfolded the blanket with a practiced flick, the thin fabric billowing slightly in the recirculated air. He dampened a corner with the remains of his water bottle, creating a makeshift shield. Then, with surprising agility, he reached up and, before anyone could stop him, slammed the damp blanket over the sparking cable and the melting plastic. A hiss, a brief flare of light, and then, nothing. The sparks were smothered. The smoke, though still present, began to dissipate. The shrieking alarm continued its relentless assault on their eardrums, but the immediate threat had been neutralized. Tiffany Hayes rushed towards him, her face a mask of relief. "Mr. Abernathy, are you all right? Are you hurt?" He lowered the blanket, now stained black and smelling even more acrid than before. "Quite all right, my dear. Though I suspect this blanket is beyond saving." He gestured towards the overhead compartment. "I believe the source of the problem has been contained." The smell lingered, a harsh reminder of the near disaster. Chad Sterling, his bravado completely extinguished, stared at Mr. Abernathy with a mixture of awe and shame. Tiffany was already back on the radio, her voice regaining its professional edge as she reported the situation. "The fire is out. I repeat, the fire is out. We need maintenance to inspect the overhead compartment in Section A, Row 3. Mr. Abernathy simply adjusted his tie and settled back into his seat, the unlikely hero who had averted a crisis, a silent testament to the fact that age was not necessarily synonymous with infirmity, and that sometimes, the most unassuming individuals possessed the greatest strength. Realization and gratitude. The tremor subsided at last. A communal sigh, thick with relief, filled the cabin. The emergency lights flickered less violently, bathing the scene in a jaundiced light. Though the tempest raged outside, the aircraft held its position. Ethan Miller, wide-eyed, released his restraints and strained to see. What in the world was that, he whispered, more to himself than anyone else present. Up front, a woman retched quietly into a bag. Others clung to their armrests, their grip a testament to their terror. The silence was palpable, punctuated only by ragged breaths and the distant howl of the storm. Then, recognition sparked. Gazes, one by one, converged on Arthur Abernathy, still belted in, his countenance ashen yet calm. Whispers arose, tentative at first, then swelling in volume. He interfered, didn't he?" It was Ethan, his finger trembling as he pointed. "He went in there, and then it ceased." The murmurs solidified into a wave of realization. The unassuming senior had, somehow, averted disaster. Salvaged them from what felt like certain doom. Chad Sterling's gut twisted, a far more unpleasant sensation than mere turbulence. Shame, corrosive and burning, climbed his throat. He avoided Abernathy's gaze. His prior callousness, the petty barbs, now felt like a scarlet letter seared into his flesh. Tiffany Hayes, ever the picture of composure, recovered her poise more swiftly. She unbuckled and, steeling herself, approached Abernathy. Chad remained frozen, his limbs heavy and unresponsive. "Mr. Abernathy," she began, her voice surprisingly steady. "Speaking for the entire crew and our passengers, I'm at a loss for words." "Thank you." She swallowed hard, a usual flawless exterior momentarily fracturing. "You were our savior. You saved us all. A faint smile touched Abernathy's lips. Merely did what had to be. He appeared drained, the ordeal having plainly exacted a heavy toll. Chad finally managed to speak, his voice a hoarse rasp. Mr. Abernathy, I am deeply sorry. For everything. My conduct, it was unprofessional, disrespectful, and utterly wrong. I am unworthy of your saving grace, but I beg you to accept my sincere apology. He felt reduced to a child, chastised and remorseful. Abernathy regarded him, his gaze surprisingly kind. Consider it accepted, young man. But learn from this experience. Remember, pride precedes a downfall. Encouraged by Tiffany's actions, Ethan Miller ventured closer to Abernathy. Sir, he exclaimed, his voice ringing with awe. That was extraordinary. What precisely did you do? How did you know what was needed? Abernathy gave a soft chuckle. That's a tale for another occasion, young man. For now, I believe we are all in dire need of a stiff drink and a restful slumber. On terra firma, if possible. Tiffany, reclaiming her authority, addressed the passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated and keep your seat belts fastened. We are currently assessing the situation and will provide updates as soon as we have them. She cast a quick glance at Abernathy, a silent expression of appreciation passing between them. Chad remained immobile, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. He had judged Abernathy, dismissed him, and treated him with scorn. And in recompense, Abernathy had rescued his life. The irony was almost unbearable. He observed as Ethan, his eyes alight with admiration, continued to bombard Abernathy with questions, the older man patiently responding. Chad knew, with a conviction that settled deep within him, that he would never erase this flight from his memory. Never forget the storm's fury, never forget the primal fear, and never forget the understated valor of Arthur Abernathy. Revealing the past. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking, the voice crackled over the intercom, laced with a relief that mirrored Ethan's own. I want to take a moment to formally thank Mr. Abernathy, who is seated in first class. His quick thinking and expertise averted what could have been a very serious incident. We are now operating normally and expect to arrive in Denver on schedule. Please join me in expressing your gratitude. A ripple of murmurs swept through the cabin. Ethan watched as people craned their necks, trying to catch a glimpse of the unassuming elderly man who had, apparently, saved them all. Tiffany Hayes, looking significantly less green than she had moments ago, squeezed Abernathy's hand. On behalf of the crew and passengers, Mr. Abernathy, thank you. You were incredible. Abernathy simply nodded, a weary calmness settling over his features. He looked drained, the adrenaline having ebbed away, leaving behind an almost translucent pallor. Chad Sterling, face etched with shame, approached Abernathy's seat. Mr. Abernathy, he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. I owe you an apology. My behavior earlier was inexcusable. Thank you for everything. He offered a shaky hand, which Abernathy accepted with a small, almost imperceptible squeeze. As Chad retreated, head bowed, Ethan leaned closer to Abernathy. Mr. Abernathy, how did you know what to do? You were so calm, so precise. Abernathy sighed, the sound a low rumble in his chest. It's been a long time, he began, his gaze drifting towards the clouds swirling outside the window. But some things you never forget. He paused, as if gathering his thoughts. I spent 40 years working as an aircraft mechanic. Started right out of high school. Worked on everything from prop planes to jets. Knew those hydraulic systems inside and out. Retired about 10 years ago. Ethan's jaw dropped. 40 years? The man had dedicated his life to the very machines that carried them through the sky. No wonder he had recognized the problem, had known exactly what to do. 40 years, Ethan repeated, awestruck. And you just knew. Abernathy chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Muscle memory, I suppose. And a healthy dose of concern. When I heard that grinding, saw the way the wing was behaving. Well, I knew we were in trouble. He ran a hand over his thinning hair. Just glad I could help. The captain's announcement faded into the background as Ethan continued to pepper Abernathy with questions, eager to glean any nugget of knowledge from the man's vast experience. He learned about the different types of hydraulic fluids, the intricacies of wing flap mechanisms, the subtle sounds of a well-maintained engine versus one on the verge of failure. With each answer, Ethan's respect for the unassuming elderly man deepened. He wasn't just some cranky old guy, he was a living, breathing encyclopedia of aviation knowledge, a silent guardian of the skies. A sincere apology. The stale air of the first-class cabin hung heavy, a stark contrast to the crisp relief Arthur Abernathy felt now that the immediate crisis was averted. The plane was on the ground, emergency crews had given the all-clear, and the relieved murmurs of the passengers filled the space. He sat rigidly, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, waiting. He didn't have to wait long. Chad appeared first, his face a mask of shame. Tiffany trailed behind, her usual confident stride replaced with hesitant steps. They stopped before him, two figures humbled in the aftermath of their misjudgment. "Mr. Abernathy," Chad began, his voice barely above a whisper. "We owe you a massive apology." He swallowed hard, meeting Arthur's gaze. "The way we treated you was completely unacceptable. There's no excuse for it." Tiffany nodded, her eyes glistening. "We were awful. We judged you based on nothing. And then, when everyone else was panicking, you saved us all." Arthur studied their faces, searching for any hint of insincerity. He saw only remorse, etched deeply into their expressions. The adrenaline was fading, leaving him with a profound sense of weariness. He wanted nothing more than to be home, but he knew this needed to happen. "Your apology is accepted," he said, his voice raspy. "But I hope you understand the gravity of your actions. Your words have power, and your assumptions can be deeply hurtful." Chad shifted uncomfortably. "We understand, sir. It won't happen again. We're taking sensitivity training. The airline requires it now." Tiffany added, "We truly are sorry for underestimating you. We were so focused on appearances. We didn't even bother to see who you really were." She pulled a small, crumpled napkin from her pocket, twisting it in her hands. "You were calm, you knew what to do, and you saved everyone. We were the ones who acted like fools." Arthur sighed, the tension slowly bleeding out of him. "It's over. The important thing is everyone is safe. And perhaps," he added, a faint smile playing on his lips, "this experience will teach you both a valuable lesson about judging books by their covers. Or, in this case, passengers by their attire." Chad managed a weak smile in return. "It already has, Mr. Abernathy. It already has." Tiffany stepped forward, extending her hand. "Thank you for accepting our apology. And thank you for saving us." Arthur took her hand, his grip surprisingly firm. Then he looked at Chad, offering his hand as well. The young man gripped it tightly, his eyes still filled with regret. "Just try to be better," Arthur said, releasing his hand. "For yourselves, and for others." He leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes. The weight of the day settled upon him, a heavy blanket of exhaustion. He simply wanted to go home. The apology had been sincere, and he accepted it. That was all. An unlikely hero's welcome. The rest of the flight felt different. The oppressive tension had evaporated, replaced by a palpable admiration directed squarely at Mr. Abernathy. Chad, shrunk in his seat, avoided eye contact. Tiffany, on the other hand, couldn't seem to stop glancing at him, a mixture of gratitude and sheepishness on her face. Mr. Abernathy himself seemed weary but at peace. He even managed a small, genuine smile when a flight attendant, the one who had initially served him his lukewarm tea, knelt beside his seat to offer a heartfelt apology. He waved it off with a gentle hand. "No harm done, my dear. We all make mistakes." The landing was smoother than anyone could have anticipated, a gentle kiss of rubber on asphalt. As the plane taxied towards the gate, a nervous energy crackled through the cabin. People were whispering, nudging each other, their gazes fixed on Mr. Abernathy. The moment the seatbelt sign chimed off, a spontaneous eruption of applause filled the aircraft. It started with a few hesitant claps, then swelled into a thunderous ovation. Passengers stood, craned their necks, and cheered. "Thank you," someone shouted. "You saved us," yelled another. Mr. Abernathy looked genuinely bewildered. He raised a hand, a slight blush creeping up his neck. "It was nothing, really," he mumbled, but his voice was lost in the roar of appreciation. Chad and Tiffany were among the last to deplane. They hung back, allowing the initial surge of passengers to disembark. Chad, his face pale, finally spoke. I need to apologize, Mr. Abernathy. My behavior was completely unacceptable. I was a jerk." Mr. Abernathy regarded him with kind eyes. "We all have our moments, son. The important thing is that you recognize it and learn from it." He extended a hand, and Chad, without hesitation, shook it firmly. As they walked down the jetway, they could see the reception waiting for Mr. Abernathy. Airport security personnel stood back, allowing a small crowd to gather near the gate. As Mr. Abernathy emerged, the applause erupted again, even louder than before. People held up signs, hastily made with airport paper and markers, that read "Thank you, hero," and "Welcome home, Mr. Abernathy." A young boy, no older than 10, pushed through the crowd, clutching a crumpled drawing. He held it out to Mr. Abernathy, his eyes wide with awe. "You're amazing, sir." Ethan Miller, the young aviation enthusiast, pushed his way to the front. "Mr. Abernathy," he called out, his voice filled with excitement, "what exactly did you do to fix the engine? What was the root cause analysis? Did you use any specialized tools?" Mr. Abernathy chuckled, a genuine, hearty sound. "Son, I just wiggled a wire. Sometimes, the simplest solutions are the best." He winked, then turned to acknowledge the cheering crowd, his face etched with a mixture of humility and gratitude. Chad and Tiffany watched from the sidelines, a silent understanding passing between them. They had witnessed something extraordinary, not just a mechanical fix, but a profound lesson in humility, forgiveness, and the unexpected places where heroism can be found. The experience had irrevocably altered their perspective, a stark contrast to the celebrity-obsessed culture they usually embraced. They knew, with a certainty that surprised them both, that they would never look at an elderly man in first class the same way again.